All right. So today, we are going to talk about demand and supply. So remember, we are in a module to review microeconomics. This is going to be the last chapter or last lecture. We're going to the review, right? So what are we going to do in this lecture? Before I show you the content, let me just show you two pictures, kind of motivate you or give you a sense what we can talk about in this lecture. So this picture just show you the data from the beginning of 2020 till mid of 2022. What we see here, so essentially this is a air cargo rate change from China to US. This is kind of like a two largest trading partners, right? And so what are we seeing? So you can see, so this number went up like crazy at the beginning of 2020, right? And then it's just goes down and it go up again, right? And then so here, so there are a few things. Number one, this is a PPE rush. What does that mean? Does anyone know? It's personal protection equipment rush. So that's at the beginning of the pandemic. So everyone is trying to get a PPE, in particular for those healthcare workers. And then so later they have a peak season. What happens? So this kind of across the world, so we were seeing the peak of the pandemic, right? So now you have a Ukraine war, and then so you have China's lockdown because they are kind of like a little bit behind the schedule, right? So this is one picture I'm showing you. Now let me show you other pictures. So and then so we kind of wrap about why I'm showing these two pictures. The other one is the average monthly electricity wholesale price. Okay. So remember, so this is, first of all, this electricity price. And second, this wholesale price. And wholesale price is slightly different from what you pay as a household, as a business or retail price, right? But in either case, it's going to show you some trend in terms of price, right? So what are we seeing? And clearly we see something very strange happening, right? So if you have not seen, if you don't pay any attention to what's going on in the world, or if you some historians look at this data without knowing what happened in Europe, is going to see something very straight going on. Like what happened? So first of all, you can see the price doubled, and then tripled, and then quadrupled. Right. So that's all happened in early or first half of 2022. Okay. So certainly, so now we understand what happens. Right. So in the first case, in the previous one, is because of the pandemic, right? So everything becomes kind of shut down, the entire work shut down, right? And then so we are trying to, so first there's a shutdown, there's a disruption in the supply chain. But then so we are trying to get through all the goods and services you need, and then a certain demand for this air cargo is going to skyrocket, right? This first picture show you. And the secondly, so in this picture, what happens is that's at the beginning. So now it's almost 1 year. It's the beginning of 2022. So Russia decided to launch a war against Ukraine, right? And then so remember, so how that matters to the electricity is because if any of you know what happens in Europe, so Russia supply more than a third of the natural gas to continental Europe, right? So that's what happens. Now, one of the main message these two slides deliver. So the main message is, so this kind of link to the title of this chapter, supply and demand, right? So you can see, so here, so in this one, it's more come from demand, right? And then so here, this more coming from supply, but certainly, so both play a role, right? But then so you can see, so the price is going to reflect the change in supply and demand. So this the main message come out of from these two pictures, right? So now, what are we going to do in this lecture? First, we are going to study what is a competitive market. I'm going to give examples. And secondly, so we are going to study demand, and then so we're going to study supply. And finally, we are going to look at equilibrium. This is kind of linked to the earlier discussion we had. So we are trying to understand what is the invisible hand and how the invisible hand guide us through to move to this particular state, which is the equilibrium, or sometimes we call it state quo. Okay, so this is a roadmap of this chapter. Now let's start with competitive market. So what is a competitive market? Okay, so look at this definition. It says a competitive market has, so look here. So the competitive market says, this one, has many buyers, right? And the sellers. Not only there are many buyers, there are also many sellers. Okay. And so they are going to trade with the same goods and service. And furthermore, none of them can influence the price. Okay, to help you to understand, so I'm going to draw a diagram. Okay, so this diagram is going to like follows. Okay. Maybe use this one, is probably easier to see. On the horizontal line, I have numbers of buyers. And on the vertical line, I have numbers of sellers. All right. And then, so here, this is a competitive market. All right. So meaning, so you have many buyers and many sellers, and they are trading with the identical goods. Again, this is a simplification, right? Just think about the example can be say example. So the bottled water market. If you go to the any grocery store, so they're gonna sell many kinds of bottled water, right? So this is a good example. Now let's look at other two, and usually, so we know less about that. So on the one hand, you have very few, one or few sellers, but you have many buyers. Okay, and actually we call it monopoly, right? So what is the example? So the example could be like in sorry, OPEC, right? So OPEC, yeah. So they are a monopoly. So sometimes we call like duopoly, whatever. So they have a small group of countries. So they decide how many oil to produce on a daily basis, right? So that's a good example. Now I was thinking about computer chips, right? I was reading a book recently. It's called a Chip War. So I just talk about the history of computer chips. Like Intel definitely is a monopoly at some point. Now, so if anyone familiar with the chips history or know about the architecture of the computer chips, so Intel, so they have what they called, just right here, Intel. Okay, this is an example of monopoly. So they have an architecture called x86. Is anyone familiar with? So now, Apple, they decide they are going to use their own chips, right? Like say example, so the computer I bought last year as a research grant, so they use different chips. They use very different architecture. It's called ARM. But in either case, those are monopoly, meaning there are very few, usually like one or two sellers in this market. Now there are many other examples. So for example, like in Omaha, so you may think about MUD, right? Or OPPD, right? And furthermore, you may think about CenturyLink, right? And then you may wonder why such things exist. What is the reason behind that? Why there's a monopoly at the first place? Usually it's because of entry cost is too high, right? Okay, so now go to the other end of the market. If we look at here, so you have one buyer or few buyers, but then so you have many sellers. Okay, we call it monopoly. Monopoly. It's missing one thing. Maybe so the spelling may not precise. Does anyone know what's how to?
Yeah, there's a P between the S and O. I think. eliminating.
Yeah. Apologize. So the spelling may not precise. Okay. Did you find?
Monopsony, it's a P between the O and S.
MONOPSONY, right? Okay. So anyway, thank you so much. So what this means is you have very few buyers, but you have many sellers to provide almost identical goods and service. So this example is not easy to come about. So the key for you is think about the buyers, the government. And you may can think about like two examples. One is like a national defense, I mean, in this market, like arms, like a military equipment. And so the example what I like to use is another one, but it's also related to the government. It's called Medicare. Medicare. So what's Medicare? So Medicare is the government provides healthcare for elderly and for disabled, right? And then in this particular case, who are the buyers and who are the seller? The government purchase, right? What good and service government is purchasing? The government purchase healthcare, medical service from many hospitals or medical service providers. Okay, so in that sense, the government has the bargaining power deciding the price. Right, so this is another example. In any case, okay, so now in this class, we are going to focus on competitive market. Right. What is interesting about a competitive market? Because there's so many buyers and sellers. None of the buyers or the sellers, they can determine the price. But however, they collectively decide who is going to be or what the price is going to be. This is kind of similar to the election, the general election. So each voter, so none of us can decide who is going to win. But collectively, so we are going to cast our vote is going to decide who's going to win. And then in this competitive market, right? So you go to the grocery store, you go to Target, right? So your purchase, your single purchase won't have much impact on the market. But then collectively, so we cast our vote. And then so we are going to decide the supply and demand, or eventually it's going to determine the price of a particular product, right? So back to the slides. Competitive market. So this is what we're going to focus on, right? The supply and the demand model, that's going to be a focus of this lecture. Is going to model on how a competitive market behaves. And then so remember, there are two sides in the market. You have a buyer and a seller. But then so in this market, what's particular? In the sense you have so many buyers and sellers. They are going to trading with the same goods and service. Again, so the same here is just simplification, right? If you like, you can say, okay, so you can just further classify different bottled water into different market, right? But then, so the analysis is the same, right? Now, we are going to start with demand. Remember, so there are two sides. We'll start with demand, then we'll look at the supply side, and then so bring them together, right? So before we start to the demand side, I'm going to emphasize a principle we studied in the previous lecture. It's called ceteris paribus. So what that means? It just means, okay, we are going to holding everything else constant. Okay. Actually, here, in some sense, we are going to hold the supply as given. We don't touch on supply. We only focus on demand. As a matter of fact, demand is going to affect supply. But for the moment, we just shut down that channel. Right? So this just apply the ceteris paribus principle as we discussed earlier, so that we can have a sharp prediction or we have better understanding regarding how the market works. All right, so number one. Number two, see here, I want to highlight, so not only we take supply as given, we also take price as given. Okay, let me write that. So we are going to take two things as given. One is the price. The second is the supply side. So these two are given. Or in other words, you can think about, so we just take price as fallen from heaven. Where price come from, we do not know. Okay, here, so the way we do the business is we just say price is a signal. We look at the demand side. Or individuals observe this signal, and then they are going to decide what they're going to do. But we exclusively focus on demand side. And later we are going to do the same thing for supply side. And then finally, we are going to bring them together. And there, so we are going to unlock the secret where price come from. For now, price is given. Okay. So demand is going to represent the behavior of buyers. So these are a few concepts we are going to discuss in this slide. Right. Or in other words, the highlight here is the behaviors of buyers, and more specifically, how buyers respond to price signal. We have a demand curve which shows the quantity demanded. Okay, now here there are two things. One is the quantity demanded, and secondly, at different prices. Remember, so prices are given. Meaning, so we don't know where the price coming from, but for the moment, you take that as given. We are going to unlock the secret in a few, maybe just next class. Now, what is quantity demanded? So quantity demanded is the quantity. First of all, the quantity. Buyers, now here, there are two things I want to highlight. Number one, buyers are willing and they are able to purchase. Okay, so this is at a particular price. So essentially, there are three things. Given the price, number one. Now, so at that price, how much you are willing to and you are able to. So able to is like your feasibility, whether you have the capacity, whether you have the budget or not. And willing to is, okay, so whether I'm willing to consume that, right? So those are different. Like civic number in this background picture shows, right? So this old gentleman, so most likely he's able to afford the scooter, but is that in his interest to buy this scooter? Most likely, probably not. Right? Just give you a flavor. On the other hand, a teenage boy, I always like to use my son as an example, right? He has lots of need or want, right? But many things probably is not in his feasible set, or he doesn't have enough money, or as a parent, not willing to spend that money for something not useful, right? Okay, now we can use example to further understand what is demand curve and what is quantity demanded. Right. So this example can be kind of the arbitrary, but you feel free to change to something you like or you prefer. Here we are going to look at the demand for cotton. Again, so I want to highlight price are given. Okay, we don't have a story about the price yet. And here we are going to exclusively focus on how demand respond to price. When price is equal to 2, and then the quantity demanded is going to equal to 7.1. And it can be a little bit arbitrary. But however, given that point, the next one is not arbitrary. There follows some patterns or follow some principles. When the price falls, okay, again, so we don't have a story why price falls, but it's going to come up in the next lecture. When price falls, what are you going to see? So the quantity demanded will increase. Now it is very natural, but certainly I'm going to give you some economic explanation. Why price falls, the quantity demanded is going to increase. But intuitively, because your purchasing power is going to increase, right? With the same amount of money, you can afford more. That's the most intuitive explanation or most simple explanation. And these things can keep moving, right? And so pay attention on the left-hand side. So what we did, so essentially what I did is it just plot the combination of price and quantity demanded in this diagram. Now remember, now pay attention. So how this diagram was plotted. On the horizontal line, we have quantity. On the vertical line, we have price. Okay, this is like a common practice. Usually we just put the quantity on the horizontal line and the price on the vertical line. And then, so this diagram on the left-hand side, essentially, it's just virtualize, it's going to virtualize what we observed from the table, right? And then, so let's just finish this part. Okay, so we have a total of 7 observations, right? And then, so we just put those 7 observations on this diagram. And finally, we are going to connect connect those 7 points. All right, and that's what we're going to get. We are going to get a demand curve. A demand curve. Okay. And then so a few things. Number one, as the price falls, what happens to the quantity demanded? The quantity demanded is going to move to this direction. This is number one. Okay. Number two, I always want to emphasize price at this point are given. We don't have a story about price yet, but eventually I'm going to give the story about price. And the price is going to intrinsically related to the invisible hands. Okay, so just keep that in mind. Anyway, so this is the demand curve. Or in other words, demand curve essentially just show the relationship between quantity demanded and price. Or in other words, the demand curve is going to represent how quantity demanded respond to price change. But again, so the price is a signal to you. Right. Now here, we want to pay attention to 2 closely related concepts. Okay. On the one hand, you have change in demand. Yeah, this one's a little bit more subtle. Let's look at the right-hand side. This is not the same as changing quantity demanded. Start with easier one. What is change in quantity demanded? So essentially it says you just move along the curve. And what causes you to move along the curve? It must be you observe a different signal. What is the signal? Price. Or in other words, change in quantity demanded is going to cause exclusively by the change in price. Right? So let me summarize. So change in quantity demanded just move along the curve. Right? And secondly, so it's caused by change in the price of the good itself. But what causes price change? Again, so we will wait for the future lectures. For now, you just say, okay, if there's an arbitrary change in price of the goods, and then so you're going to see people are going to adjust their behavior. Like, for example, so the gas price went up last year, and then so normally people is going to reduce their consumption. Either they just stay home or they just cancel their travel. Right? So just give you an example. Now, what is change in demand? So change in demand, essentially you're changing the pattern. Okay? Meaning, so even given the price, if the price doesn't change, but your quantity of demand is going to change. So actually, so we are going to have a curve, or the we have two pictures show you the difference. On the left-hand side, this is change in demand. On the left-hand side, change in demand. So what that means, even price keep at $1. But now what we've seen is the quantity demanded will increase from 10 to 15. Right? So here actually we say, so there's increase in demand. How we understand this is an increase in demand? There are two ways to understand. At price one, if the price is at a given, or if price is fixed, now the quantity demanded will increase from 10 to 15. So this is an increase. One way to understand. Alternatively, you can look at this direction. If you compare it here, this probably is like 50 cents. At the D1, or when we follow this demand curve, right? In order to demand 15 units, okay? Or when you are going to demand 15, it must be the case that the price is sufficiently low. Like in this particular case, it must be 50 cents. But now if you look at a D2, your willingness to buy increase substantially in the sense, so that if I want to buy the same amount, which is 15, but now I'm willing to pay $1. Right? So there are two ways to see why a rightward shift is an increase in demand. Right? But then, so immediately you should realize if the curve shifts to the left, then what happened? There's a decrease in demand, right? It goes same argument. If the price is fixed, the quantity demand is going to fall. Or alternatively, if you want to keep the amount or keep the quantity demanded, you must reduce the price even further. All right, so there are two ways to understand the change in demand, the direction. Now, on the right-hand side of these slides, we are going to see change in quantity demanded, right? So meaning, so you're essentially is going to keep the line, but you're going to move along the line. What caused this move is just because the signal you observe, which is the price. You only observe the change in price of the commodity or the goods itself, nothing else, right? And then so you're going to move along this curve. But clearly, if you move to this direction, this is a increase in quantity demanded, and usually this is caused by a reduction in price. On the other hand, if you move to this direction, and then so we are going to say there's an increase in quantity demanded. Right? To summarize, so this two is going to represent different movement. And secondly, so they have different costs. For changing quantity demanded, it's very simple. It's going to cost exclusively by changing the price. But then the change in demand is going to caused by something different. So that's what we're going to study. But first, let's just bring your attention, law of demand. What this says, higher price for goods or service leads people to demand a smaller quantity. And usually this was caused by a reduction in purchasing power, right? Just for example, you have the same budget. Now the price rises, and then you can afford less. On the other hand, the price falls, you can afford more. So this is largely where this law of demand comes from. Now this is this kind of replay what we just discussed in the previous slides. Right? So in terms of shift of the demand, there are two possibilities. Possibility number one, the curve shift to the left, right? Okay. Shift to the left. Shift to the left. And then so we call this a decrease in demand. And why this was called as a decrease in demand? And again, this just repeat what I just said earlier. You have two ways to understand. One, so look at here. Look at this dimension. Or we should look at this direction. Okay. Same price, but you're going to demand less. This is one way. Alternatively, you look at this direction. Okay, if you want keep the quantity demanded the same, or you want to keep up the demand, the only things, or you must reduce the price. So that just means households are less willing to purchase. You have to persuade them, or you have to provide incentive. And then here, what's the incentive you can provide? You lower the price or go on sale, right? So this is a decrease in demand, and the curve shift to left. But then you need to think about, or just ask yourself, what caused the curve, or what caused demand to change? But this is going to come out soon. Alternatively, sometimes you're going to observe an increase in demand. The curve is going to shift to right. Again, so you are going to have the same two ways to understand, right? You want to keep the price. When you keep the price constant, and then so there's a greater quantity demanded, this direction. Alternatively, if you want, you only cares about the quantity, and then so people are willing to pay more. The households or consumer or the demand side is willing to pay the double price to get the goods. So this is increasing demand. Okay. Now we go to this slide. This is going to explain to you what caused the curve to shift, either shift to the left or shift to the right. Right. So there are few important factors. Okay. So I'm going to list them one by one and then go to details. So what caused the curve shift? Right. So first, there's a change in the price of related goods. And secondly, there's a change in income, change in taste, change in expectation, and finally change in the number of consumers. Now let's go one by one. Let's start with the first one. Okay, it's coming up. Next one. Change in the price of related goods. But then you have to understand how the change in price of related goods affects the demand. We need to differentiate two types of related goods. The first one is called substitute. It's called substitutes. And the next one, or a different one, is called a complement. Let's go one by one. Start with substitutes. To understand what is substitutes, let's just look at an example. So in the example, actually, there's a question. What happened to the demand for travel in Hawaii if the safety cost of traveling to Mexico increase? And here, so this is an example to show you what is substitutes. Let me highlight. Hawaii, travel to Hawaii or travel to Mexico. I would say, so maybe we need to narrow a little bit. So focus on the southern part, right? No, northern part of Mexico, like coastal area, except than Cancun. All right. So why we put these two together? Beaches, they are very similar in terms of weather, in terms of landscape, right? So we like take a vacation over there if we have the budget. So in that sense, they are substitutable, meaning so you may at some point you may indifferent one versus the other. So both give you this warm tropical flavor and give you the enjoyment and give you this landscape, give you relax. So they are substitutable, right? Now, once we understand they are substitutable, now let's see so how the price of one is going to affect the demand for the other, right? So if it becomes more costly to travel to Mexico, first of all, what would happen to the demand for traveling to Mexico? Go down, right? So this is law of demand. And then what are you going to do? So there's alternative, and then you're going to switch to something else, which is Hawaii. Why you switch to Hawaii? Because they're substitutable, right? So now you're going to give up travel plan to Mexico. You're going to choose, or you're going to substitute travel to Hawaii, right? So as a response, so rising costs of traveling to Mexico. Okay. And finally, we define two goods as substitutes. If Okay, so this kind of a little tricky, right? So we say two goods are substitutes if the decrease in price of one leads to a decrease in the demand for the other. Or in other words, so they are going to move in the same direction. Let me write down. Okay, so or let's put it here. So two goods are substitute if the P of one decrease implies the quantity demand implies quantity demand so P of one decrease is going to imply quantity demand for the other is going to decrease. How this happens? So if when P1 decrease, this is going to lead to Q1 is going to increase, right? This law of demand. Now, because substitute, and then so you're going to reduce the other one because at the end, what you care is like Q1 plus Q2, sort of, right? Because they're substitutable. Okay, so this is substitutes. Now we look at other possible relationship in two goods. We call it complement, but certainly there are goods, they are totally independent, right? But these two are just related. So if they are related, how they are related. The other one is called complements. Right? And then so it's going to go to the opposite. So first, let's just look at the definition. Two goods are complements. Okay, so I'm going to write down if the P1 increase, it's going to lead to Q2, it's going to decrease. Okay, so what's the logic? So the logic is, so P1 leads to Q1 to decrease. All right, but different from complements, different from substitutes. Let me write down substitutes. What we care is Q1 plus Q2 because they are substitute to each other. But then, so what about a complement? Complement just means so you're going to consume them all together. Okay, it's not their sum. It's just okay. So either you consume the same quantity or a constant fraction. Let me give you an example of complement. Okay, my left-hand side shoes is a perfect complement of my right-hand side shoes. Okay, does it make sense? So this is a perfect example of complementarity in terms of goods. And they are complement in the sense, okay, so whenever I purchase a left-hand side shoes, I always buy another one from a right-hand side shoes. And you can think about, okay, so they are so perfect complement with each other. You've never seen any sellers sell shoes separately. It could be the case you have some like a designer shoes. Okay, so you just lost the left one, and then you need to have right one. Right. Another example. So I know many students use the AirPod. Right. So AirPods, so your left side AirPod and right hand side AirPod, they are perfectly complements. And hence that's why Apple or whatever wireless AirPods wireless part you are gonna buy, usually they're gonna sell in pairs. But certainly eBay, so you can see, so there's like one, they are going to only sell left-hand side or sell the right-hand side, just in case you lost one of them. In any way, so okay, so in any case, so those are two examples, show you what are complements. But in reality, there are many other examples, like this background picture. When you purchase a car, usually what else you need to consume? Gasoline. Right? And maybe so in the winter, so maybe there are another things that are complement, which is like car wash. Right? So just give you another example. And then in these days, maybe when you buy a cell phone, and usually you have your phone protector. So those are complements. Right? All right, to summarize, there are two possible relationships between two related goods. One, let's go back to the previous one. They are substitutes. Okay, so when they're substitutes, so at the end, what you care about is their total quantity because they are you are indifferent. And then so their relationship is price of one drops leads to quantity of the other drops, or they move in the same direction. But now if it's complements, and what it cares about, so they're constant fraction. If you don't remember, just use the example I give to you, your left-hand side shoes versus your right-hand side shoes. Or if you prefer, you use your left-hand side AirPod versus your right side AirPod. So these are perfect complements. All right. So you lost your left one, and then your right one becomes useless. You buy a left one, you must get a right one. So this is complement. And then so if your left AirPod becomes more expensive, and then your willingness to buy the right one is going to decrease because you just consume them all together. All right, so this is called a complement. Okay. Summarize here, right? So consumer often have to buy goods together. So this is called complements. An increase in the price of gasoline will decrease the demand for SUVs. Right, so this is example. Now the third factor is change in income. But how change in income affect demand is going to depend on what type of goods we are talking about. Or we said the natural of the goods in question. Now, usually we are talking about two different goods. One is normal goods. Demand will increase when income increase, or vice versa. Meaning, so if your income decrease, you're going to reduce the demand. So there are plenty of examples. I would say most of the goods we consume on a daily basis, they are normal goods. Right? So it just go with your income in the same direction. Now, we have another type of goods we call inferior goods. It's different from normal goods. Your demand is going to decrease when your income increase, right? Like this background picture, instant noodle or junk food, usually so your demand is going to decrease when your income increase, right? So now here I'm asking you a question. So here we just differentiate between normal goods and inferior goods. But what is another? So, but usually in macroeconomics also they talk about the necessity versus luxury goods. Does anyone know what's the difference? What's the difference between necessity and the luxury goods? Yes.
Unnecessary is something you need, and luxury is something
You want, right? So this is very good in layman person, but this is in layman language. But in terms of economics, can we be a little bit more specific, or how we can describe the difference? What you said make total sense. That's great. Thank you. Let me give you a hint. If the price of a necessity increase, how much your demand is going to change? Not much. But if the price of a luxury change, how much your demand is going to change? It's going to change a lot, either increase or decrease, depending on the direction, right? So now you see the difference. Yes.
So a necessity has like a vertical-ish demand curve.
Right. Or not sensitive to price change.
Yeah.
And the luxury goods is very sensitive to price change. But the larger reflects what he just pointed out. One is you must consume. The other is reflect your want. One reflect your need, right? And then in a technical term, if you go to more advanced class, usually they call it elasticity is different. Elasticity is essentially measuring how your demand is going to respond to price change. If it is a necessity, the elasticity is very small. Meaning, so regardless how price change, you're not going to adjust your demand. On the other hand, luxury goods, the elasticity is very high, meaning if the price change and your demand is going to adjust quite a lot. Right. But back to here. So in this class, we focus on normal goods versus inferior goods. Those are related with your income. Right. Now, the fourth factor we call changes in tests. Right. So what are tests? Usually tests and preference, they are linked together. So those are subjective and it varies among consumers. Right. Few examples. Seasonal change or phase have a predictable effect on demand. Why? It's because when the season change, and then so your demand is going to change, your taste or your preference is going to change. That's why, so for example, Costco, they usually have like seasonal food or seasonal supply, right? Because they know, so that's the time you're going to demand those goods or service. And then, so I have a question for you. Why these retailers, why they have these seasonal sales? Why not just let those things on sale or on display year round? Is my question clear? Why they do such? Yes. Right. So I guess there are like two reasons. Number one, like you say, is a kind of save the cost. Like saving them in the winter, sorry, in the summer, no one's gonna demand except for like a very small, very occasion. So people's not gonna demand for winter clothes. If they put on sale or put on display, it's gonna cause their space or cost their management, right? Additional to that, I think so. They have this seasonal sale. It's kind of a notch. It's kind of give you a hint or suggestion, or I would say it's like give you incentive to purchase. They kind of remind you, okay, so this is something you want to buy, even though you feel it's not necessary, right? So this is like a marketing strategy. Now back to here, another example. What happens to demand for face masks in 2020? It was obvious, right? So it went up when it skyrocketed. And why? It's because the taste and the preference suddenly changed in 2020. So your personal safety becomes a priority, right? Now, next one, change in expectation. This is going to also affect demand. But in order to allow this change in expectation have impact on your demand, there is a requirement or there's a prerequisite. Meaning, so if the consumer have a choice about the timing of the purchase, many times you do not have a choice in terms of when to consume, right? But there are occasions you have the luxury to choose when to consume. If that's the case, you're going to purchase or you're going to make your demand decision according to expectation. Now let's look at example. Okay. So example is this here. So look at it here. If the price for Xbox S are expected to drop right before Christmas, what would you expect the sale in November? It's going to fall or rise? It's going to fall. And why? You just wait, right? As a matter of fact, like February is a good time to buy a TV usually. Why? So does anyone know? February, at least in the US market, is probably the best time to buy a TV.
Well, they have a bunch of leftovers from Christmas. I don't know.
Decrease price to increase demand.
Of course, that's what's going to happen. But so what's behind that is the Super Bowl. Actually, so the demand is going to peak at the Super Bowl, right? So this is slightly different from Christmas, but it's related, right? So again, that's why I say United States, right? Okay, so the buyers look at the second bullet point. Buyers is going to adjust their current demand or spending in anticipation of the direction of the price. Right? So meaning, so if the price is going to fall in the near term, if I can decide when to consume, I'm going to wait. If not, I probably just buy, right? So let me just give you an example. So when you cannot choose a timing of the consumption, if you need to see a doctor, if you have urgency, you can, right? But in other cases, you can, right? So this is how expectation can change your demand. Now let's look at a practice question. So this question asks you, when the price of petroleum goes up, what happens to demand for natural gas, coal, and solar power? The key to understand, to answer this question, actually their hint is here, right? So assume these goods are substitutes. They are substitutable in terms of generating energy. Now, if the price of one goods goes up, if they're substitutes, and then the quantity of the other goods will go up as well, right? Because you're going to consume more the other goods because the other goods becomes relatively cheaper. Hence, the answer is going to be A. Now, it's all the natural gas, coal, or solar power. Your demand for those things is going to go up as a response to a rising price of petroleum. Now, let's look at the last factor, is change in the number of consumer, right? Essentially population. When population change, then the number of buyers of a particular goods is going to change, right? And then certainly that's going to affect demand. So one example. So what happened to the demand for diaper in Russia as the birth rate dropped? And clearly it's going to fall, right? In the United States, now let's go back to our domestic economy. In the United States, we are undergoing a very significant demographic change. Does anyone know what is that? Right now, yes. In the United States, I'm not sure. So that's because in the United States usually relies on the immigration. The birth rate, I'm not sure. It happens, but it's not the most significant things I have in mind. But thank you. Yeah.
And the boomers are starting to retire.
Right. So baby boomers start to retire.
They don't have the work ethic that us younger generations have, unfortunately.
Right. So that's why I say this. But there's so tell me, so what impact it can have on certain the demand for certain goods.
Oh, it might cause our wages to go up if
So that's more on the supply side. Yeah, let's just so that's a good point. What else? If the large cohort, if large amount of baby boomer generation returns, yeah.
It's not the demand of adult life singers. Or the demand of adult life singers because of the boomers retiring.
Right. So they are going to demand different things, right? And then the demand for those things, maybe, I don't know, maybe like smaller house or something like a vacation related, right? And certainly is going to play a significant role. I just point out it's going to have big impact on labor market. So we are going to talk about that later because we are going to have one chapter to look at labor market. In any case, so that's an example how demographic change is going to have impact on demand, right? So now we have look at all these factors, right? So before I close this discussion, let's look at a few practice questions. Which of the following will cause increase in the demand for cars? Let's go one by one. First, if the price of car tires increase because of a Malaysian rubber shortage, how would that affect demand for car?
Decrease.
Will decrease, right? Because essentially that's going to make car more expensive. Now, second one, concrete steel reinforcement rod are replaced by aluminum along the Atlantic coast to prevent rusting. How is that related to cars? The keyword is here. The keyword is aluminum. How aluminum is related to cars?
You need aluminum.
You need another aluminum to make cars in modern right now, because it's very light, very durable. Okay, but first of all, what would happen to the price of aluminum? Go up, right? Because the demands go up from other sector. If it go up and then so the cars become more expensive, then the demand is going to dampen, right? So B is not correct. Now C, gasoline price dropped. So now just circle back to OPEC, you mentioned, right? So OPEC is essentially a small group of country kind of control the supply of oil, right? So anything they say in terms of oil is going to have a dramatic impact on the gasoline price. So now if the gasoline price drop, how would that affect the demand for cars? They are complements, right? Except you're driving the EV, okay? So C is going to correct. Now, what happened to D? It's not really related, right? Okay, so the answer is C. Okay, so close this part. So we are going to move from individual demand to market demand. Or in other words, we are going to move from micro to macro. But here I want to warn you, so macroeconomics is not a simple summation of macro. But for now, so for this part, it can be, but eventually I'm going to show you, I'm going to emphasize, I'm going to expand to you, it's not a simple summation. For now, so we're going to look at two individuals. Remember, we like to use number two, that's the easiest way to represent many. We are going to use two to represent many identity or many households or many demand side. Okay, so each of them is going to have a demand curve, and this demand curve follows the law of demand. Not only they follow law of demand, they're also subject to those factors we just talked about. Or in other words, so they are going to subject to this rule we just talked about. Water can shift their curve to the left or to the right. Now we just bring them together. We are going to get the market demand curve. And in the middle, so you have this simple summation. Okay, because this is a summation, means all the property we have discussed in terms of individual is going to carry on or is going to apply when we look at aggregate. Meaning, so this aggregate demand or market demand, we are also subject to the law of demand. All the factors cause individual demand curve to move is going to apply to market demand as well. This includes the price of related goods, includes income, includes expectation, so on and so forth, right? Why? It's because the market demand is a summation. Okay. Now I'm going to close today's discussion by showing you a short video. And when we watch this video, you may want to ask a few questions, or you just keep a few questions in mind. So why there's no market for certain goods, quote unquote goods? Why there's no such market? To answer that question, usually it's associated with the trade-off analysis as we discussed before. Okay, and then you may think about this: if we open up that market, what is going to be the cost and what's going to be the benefit, right? And then if there's no market exists, it must be the case the cost exceeds the benefit. And then, but there's in this case, you need to identify. You need to identify what are the costs and what are the benefits. Yes.